This is a holiday centerpiece that everyone will be talking about. This is a seitan turkey with a skin. The skin is crispy and chewy while the center is moist and juicy and shreddy. And the best part is that this is 100% plant-based, made with ingredients you probably already have in your kitchen. It's actually made from bread flour. And this seitan is very protein dense while being low in carbs, and that's because we removed the starch and we're just left with the protein. This recipe takes 2 days to make, so it isn't ideal for a last-minute meal. However, you won't find a better holiday roast at the store, and the flavor of the seitan is superior to anything made with vital wheat gluten. So to start, you're going to need about 5 pounds of bread flour and about 6 cups of water to create like a dough, and you're going to do this in the evening. Then you're going to knead that dough to kind of form like a gluten, and you want to stretch and form the dough to kind of help build that up. And then you cover your ball of dough in salted water, and you want to add anywhere from like 2 to 8 tablespoons of just any kind of cheap salt. And then the salt helps strengthen the gluten, so it'll be easier to work with the next day. And you just kind of let that sit in the salted water overnight, and then it's the next day that you pour away all that water. Then you're going to refill your large bowl with cold water, and you're going to start washing the flour. So that process is just where you squeeze the dough under the water, and the gentle squeezing under the water will release the starch from the dough, and eventually you'll be left with pure gluten protein. If you didn't know, gluten is wheat's protein and starch is wheat's sugar. So when you remove the starch, you're just left with pure protein. So you're going to continue to squeeze the dough until it looks very web-like and there's no smoothness to it at all. The smooth portions of the dough will still have starch in it, so you want to squeeze that out. And you have to be really gentle with the dough so it doesn't break apart. So you want to make sure you use cold water because cold temperatures helps the gluten kind of seize up, and it just makes separating the starch from it a lot easier. When your water looks very thick, pour it into another bowl so you can use that starch water for another recipe. We are going to be using some of that starch, so make sure that you do save some of it. Then refill your bowl with more water and continue to squeeze out the starch from the dough. You want to keep kneading it until the water comes out almost clear, kind of like this, so there's no smooth pockets of dough. This whole process takes about a half hour, but it can take up to 40 minutes. It all kind of depends on how fast that you're able to work.
When I was done washing my seitan yesterday, I was just kind of done with filming. It's been a really crazy week, and I needed to be done. So if you are just like done washing it, make sure that you're letting your seitan just kind of rest because it's going to keep oozing off water. I already poured off the excess water. I had this just resting in the fridge overnight. So that's definitely an option for you if you're just kind of done after washing it. So if you are wanting to get this recipe just out of the way, let it rest, and while you're letting this just kind of sit aside, you're going to be making your broth. Now, this part is kind of optional because you could get away with just using like a vegetarian chicken broth. I like using this Bullion, but I find that it just, it tastes chickeny and not like turkey. And to make it taste more like turkey, and honestly just to make it more flavorful in general, I sliced up an onion, I have some garlic, and we're gonna be adding some dried shiitake mushrooms, a little bit of miso, smoked salt, and I'm one of those people that I like to make my beans in the Instant Pot, so I always have a ton of Aquafaba. Aquafaba is great in any kind of homemade broth just because it adds like extra like minerals, and a lot of these same minerals are found in proteins, so it gives it a more meat-like flavor. So if you ever make beans in your Instant Pot from dried, save your Aquafaba because it makes the best broths. So to get started, you're going to want to slice up your onion. It doesn't need to be in like really small pieces. I'm just doing chunks, and crushed some garlic, and we're gonna start frying this up. So I'm gonna be making my broth in an Instant Pot. So I'm gonna start by sauteing it. You can do this on the stove if you want, just like make sure that you have like a really large like soup pot so that you can fit everything. And just, you know, turn it up probably to like a high heat. I have this seitan just on like normal. I'm gonna add like a tablespoon worth of coconut oil. Help like caramelize all these vegetables a little bit so it's a little bit more flavorful. To it, and now I'm gonna add a big handful of dried shiitake mushrooms. And I know it's kind of weird, like we're not rehydrating them first, but I think it's the most flavorful if you literally just cook them from dried and even saute them while they're still dried, because they absorb a lot of the onion flavor. It's super good. At this point, we're gonna add Aquafaba. I'm adding about 2 cups here, and then I'm gonna do another 4 cups of just water.
Give that a nice stir to deglaze the bottom of your pan, and then add about 4 tablespoons of vegetarian chicken bouillon, 1 tablespoon of miso, and reduce the heat to slow cook on low for the Instant Pot, or reduce it to a slow simmer for the stove.
The main difference between this seitan turkey recipe and my classic flour washed seitan recipe is this one is more turkey-like in the sense of flavor through the broth, and because this actually has a skin. Now, part of the way that we make this skin for the seitan is to create a fat sauce. So that way there's actually something that pulls apart and it's even more meat-like. So to create the skin, you need to make sure that you've saved some of your wheat starch. And you'll notice that some of the wheat starch will have water that is separated. So the first step is we're gonna pour off that water so we just have more of like the thicker wheat starch liquid.
Combine 2 tablespoons of the wheat starch, 3 tablespoons coconut oil, and 1 tablespoon of smoked yeast, and kind of stir that all up. That's our fat sauce. This is going to help laminate the different layers in our seitan so it's extra shreddy and meaty. Divide your gluten into 2 chunks, about 1/3 and 2/3 in size, and then stretch out the larger portion of the gluten into a nice long tube, and then you want to coat it with your fat sauce. And then you want to start tying your gluten into a big knotted loaf. This helps create meaty layers in your seitan turkey. So try to tie the knots as tightly as you can without letting the gluten tear, and try to tie the knots like on top of each other so it's just one big knotted loaf. And then if there's any loose bits, just try to tuck it into the knots themselves. Now take the other portion of the gluten and flatten it out, and coat the underside of it with the fat sauce, and then wrap it tightly around your knotted loaf. Try to get it nice and tight so that way it stays neat.
All right, so here we have it. So it's all folded in. Point, we're gonna grab our cheesecloth, which is like a thin fabric like this. You want it the lower grade cheesecloth, which happens to be cheaper, but if you do the lower grade one like this, it's completely see-through and you can see all these little holes. It is perfect for this. So we're gonna drape that, put our seitan in there. We're gonna tie it into a nice tight little ball, just like this. And totally optional, but you can cover your seitan with any leftover fat sauce just for extra flavor. And now we're gonna put this into our Instant Pot and let it simmer overnight. More option on how you can create your skin for your turkey. So we have our knotted up seitan and it's all covered in the fat sauce. And we have this other bit of seitan here reserved for the outside skin. But what we can do is also cover it in a layer of rice paper, and this makes it so that way there's just an extra thick skin that really separates from the rest of the seitan. And I'm gonna make both of them so that way we can do a side-by-side comparison, so that way you can decide which method you prefer. So the first step is I'm gonna go rinse all my rice paper up in water, and we're gonna cover it in this.
Essentially what we're doing is dipping the wet rice paper into the fat sauce, and then we're coating the knotted loaf in it. So all the other steps are the same. And after the loaf is totally coated, we wrap it in the other layer of gluten, and then we wrap it up in the cheesecloth, and we slow cook it in broth overnight.
It is the next day. I'm gonna get my seitan out of the Instant Pot. So it like really firmed up overnight. Oh, this looks so good. So while you're pulling off the cheesecloth from the seitan, you might lose a little bit of the skin, and that's okay. That's gonna happen with like this type of cheesecloth. But what's nice is that it gives it this great texture on the outside. I think really adds to the meaty look of the whole thing.
So from unwrapping the seitan, it does come out of the cheesecloth a lot easier if you don't coat the exterior with the fat sauce. However, I think both of them look great. It's really up to your own personal preference.
Now that we have our seitan unwrapped, what we're gonna do is cover it in about a 1/4 cup of broth over and around the seitan, and that's about like a big ladle full. I do a little bit more, and that's gonna help it from drying out. I covered the seitans in about a 1/4 cup to maybe like a 1/3 cup of broth. This is just gonna help prevent the seitan from drying out because we're gonna keep basting it in the seitan have a nice crispy skin. We're going to cover the exterior in about 2 tablespoons of oil. So I have like a big tablespoon of coconut oil, and I'm just gonna rub it all on it. And the excess will just go into the broth, and this is what we're going to use to baste the seitan so that way the skin gets nice and crispy. If you wanted, you could do this step with vegan butter. That would add a little bit of nice flavor to it. This step is really to just help that skin get nice and crispy without actually drying out the seitan itself, as we still want a nice and moist seitan. Let's cover it in some poultry seasoning, smoked paprika, pepper, garlic powder, rosemary.
Brush on the oil broth mixture over the seasoned seitan.
Now that our seitan is totally seasoned, we're going to bake it in the oven for 1 hour, but every 15 minutes we're going to baste it so that way it doesn't dry out. But this way we get the perfect crispy exterior and the center will stay juicy.
We have the seitan in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and every 15 minutes I'm going to brush on more of the broth that it's cooking in, and after an hour the seitan turkey is ready to carve. Now this is the seitan without the rice paper, and here's the seitan with the rice paper. And you can tell by the interior that the one with the rice paper is much more succulent, and that fat sauce that you see will solidify as it cools, but it's still nice and shreddy.
Both of them have like a nice skin on them, and both of them are nice and shreddy. So whichever one that you decide to make is totally up to you. And now is the most exciting time to see which one we prefer to make. So I'm going to try this one. This is the seitan that is flour washed with no rice paper in it. So it's like the firmer of the two, I think. Oh my god. The skin is like actually like pretty like tough. It's like, I don't know.
Oh golly.
Oh wow, that's so good. I'll try this one.
That's good too though.
I think I prefer it without the rice paper
just because I like how firm it is, and like I think a lot of the fat sauce actually got absorbed into the seitan. But this one's like, I don't know.
I like the meat texture of this one the best, but I think overall that one is the winner.
You think so?
Yeah, like between this, the way the skin is and the way it holds and the density of it, it just, coupled with the flavor, it worked really well. With this one, the meat I felt on its own stood up better. It was shreddy in my mouth, which is like hard to get with seitan, but that one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think they're both really good. So it's up to your personal preference, but I think this one's the winner for us.